I think I would perhaps tell myself to trust my instincts and to do what I enjoy. Maybe that's a lesson it took me a little bit of time to really learn.
Robin, thank you so much for joining us here today on the Go at Manav. Could you please tell people a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, certainly. Manav, lovely to be here. It's a real pleasure. So I could easily go into loads and loads on this. Well, I'll just get straight to the point in terms of what I do for work. So yeah, my name is Robin Bonn. I am the CEO of a company called Definery. We're a specialist consulting and coaching practice. So we work with all sorts of marketing agencies, helping them accelerate growth, command a premium, and attract the best talent in their marketplace. So that's what I do for my day job.
Exciting. So before we get more onto what you're doing nowadays, I would love to go back in time. And I did a bit of research in terms of your LinkedIn, and you actually studied cell biology in university, which is very different to what you're doing right now. So could you please tell us what made you want to study cell biology and how that translated to your first job and to the rest of your career?
Sure. It's going back a while now, but I do remember that was I had no real strong sort of vocational sense about what I wanted to do. I was a pretty good all-round student, so I didn't have an obvious sort of strongest suit, if you like, to follow. But I know I always really enjoyed biology. One of the things I particularly enjoyed about it was it felt very real and very tangible. I really liked finding out how things worked, I think, in the natural world. I think kind of biotechnology was probably something in the news a fair amount at that time. So it probably sounded like a, kind of emergent career path. That's really kind of all I really remember about it. So I kind of defaulted into cell biology. I think I started on biochemistry. And that was what I realized. Clearly didn't do much research. Realized that it was far too much chemistry and not enough biology. So I switched, I think, pretty quickly in my first year. I didn't love it, if I'm honest. I enjoyed being at university, but I think with degree level science degrees, the way I characterized it, you kind of end up learning more and more about less and less. So there was sort of less big picture stuff and more very granular stuff, which didn't get me super excited. So I fell out of university with a pretty average degree, but I loved my time in Manchester. I still think of it as my second home. It's a brilliant city to be in. And went to a recruitment consultant that's the nearest one to my home, and they said, well, have you kind of you can count and you can spell. Have you considered a career in sales? And I was like, no, but let's give it a go. And that was a real lucky break. So I ended up in a technology business. It was a really solid grounding in sales. And I look back now and realize that grounding has really set me up for the career I've had in, firstly in agencies for the large part of my career, and then obviously in consulting and coaching in that space subsequent to that. We got taught a lot, we got invested in, we got trained. It was that kind of classic sales floor like you see in the movies sometimes, where there's lots and lots of salespeople, there's a leaderboard, a bell gets rung when a sale gets made. So it wasn't like we were all rivals for one another, but there was a real, culture of selling in that organization, and obviously understanding technology at that time. This is the late 90s. It was a great grounding for the way that the world has gone since. So yeah, from cell biology into technology, my next job was in an agency, and I was sort of off and running, really.
Wow, that's definitely an interesting story I'd love to hear. And fast forward now, a few years later, you're in your time working in an agency. What would you say has been your most proudest moment you feel in your career so far that you could just talk over and over again, but not over and over again as if right now we can talk about it quickly?
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple that spring to mind. This is a funny one, actually. I was talking about with someone about this a while ago. There was a moment when I was running a pitch during my agency career where it was pretty clear that it was not going well. Like the client was pretty disengaged. There wasn't any nodding. The body language was all terrible. Probably having been in that situation before, the default behavior would be to just carry on and keep going and sort of, hope that miraculously things got better. And of course they never do. And I was very proud to have the presence of mind to say to the client, do you know what? Let's just stop here because this isn't working. It's clear it's not working. Let's just, we can either kind of plow on and it'd be kind of awkward for everybody, or we can just maybe have a different kind of conversation. So we did. We stopped. We sort of explored a little bit about what was not kind of gelling and why, we were, getting it wrong and it wasn't landing with them. I'd love to tell you that we then went on and won the pitch. We didn't. It wasn't like a sort of amazing superhero moment, but I was very proud of having the presence of mind to say, you know what, like, this is dumb. It doesn't have to be this way. It can be a different way, and sort of taking responsibility for that. And I think that's probably a trait that's quite important to me. So yeah, I think that's one. That's a moment. I think like since running my own business, I think there's a mindset which I hold to be a highlight all the time. And I don't know enough about your backstory, but you might have heard a similar thing. But if you've ever run your own business, a lot of people will come up to you who also run their own business, particularly if they're a small business like ours. And there's this constant fear that it will all disappear one day. And there's a kind of constant worry that, oh God, it might all fail. And I'm very happy, and I've always said this to people, I've never had that, because my basic sort of sense on running a business is that I run the business I want to run. And if there's no demand for it, then that's okay. That's a learning. And I'll have to come up with something else, or I'll have to go get a proper job. But just being able to maintain that mindset that, actually, I don't worry about it all disappearing. It seems to be relatively unusual in the case of running a small business. And I feel like it's really healthy mindset for me to hang on to. So yeah, I think I'm pretty proud of that.
That's an interesting answer, because I was actually going to ask you next, what has been one piece of advice you've taken throughout the rest of your career? And I think you've kind of already answered that question, but I now want to actually, would you say that you've answered that question in terms of, was that something you've carried on for the rest of your career journey, or has there been like another or one particular career advice you've actually kept as of to this day you'd still take forward?
I wouldn't say this is advice as such. It was a bit of recognition I had. Long story short, I asked my boss at the time, this is when I was at Omnicom, the first time I was there, during my agency career. And I asked my boss, Marco, at RAP, quite a difficult question in front of most of the agency. And he, clearly he couldn't answer it frankly in front of everybody. And I wasn't trying to be difficult. It was just quite an insightful question. And to his credit, he sort of batted it away, very gently, and then took me back into his office afterwards and said, look, this was a really good question, and I've answered it. I'm answering it now one-to-one, and I'm going to tell you why I couldn't answer it in front of everybody else. And I had an enormous amount of respect for him for doing that, rather than just letting me, disappear off and wonder why he didn't answer it. I think that it wasn't, as I say, such direct advice, but I love the idea of asking really, really good questions. And I think it's at the heart of great selling. It's at the heart of great consulting. It's at the heart of great coaching. It's just a great habit to continue to develop. You never master it. You can always get better at it. I think there's something very profound about a person's ability to ask really helpful, curious questions rather than make assumptions or to slip into judgment, which again, we're all prone to do.
Definitely. I think in his point of view, he could have saw something that he wanted to let you know one-on-one, but did not want everyone else to know. On the contrast, how do you deal with failure, first of all, and what's been a big learning lesson you've taken from the failures throughout your career? And that might be your time working in an agency or right now.
I'm not a big fan of the notion of mistakes or, retrospect or hindsight or anything like that. Maybe this is just kind of getting older. I probably wasn't quite so philosophical when I was younger, but, you don't have to look very far to find sort of little motivational sentences that speak to stuff like this. I don't really see failure as failure. I don't see mistakes as mistakes. They're all just learnings really at the end of the day. As long as you acknowledge them and recognize that, you want to keep repeating them, then it's worthwhile. And some of those mistakes or missteps cost you a bunch of time, energy, money, relationships, whatever. And obviously the bigger misstep, the more likely you are to learn from it. So I think I've probably got quite a healthy mindset when it comes to stuff like that. Even if I look back and think, you know what, in retrospect, I would have done that differently. I try not to beat myself up about it. Life's too short for that.
Yeah, life is definitely too short to care about mistakes. Definitely a learning lesson, but the way how I see it is, when one door closes, another door opens. I mean, rejection is redirection. There are definitely ways we can
Nice.
have
I like that.
Yeah, it's definitely more of having a positive attitude to going forward. So now moving on, a few years later, you've co-founded Clevernest Property Group. So could you please tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So this is my sort of side hustle slash pension. I run it with my wife, Inga. She and I, we met about 2.5 years ago, and we were both involved in property in one way or another. I was a kind of accidental landlord in as much as I owned a flat that I used to live in London many, many years ago. And she was a more serious property investor. And one of the things we shared when we met was a sense that a sort of an instinct for self-determination. We kind of want to be able to design how our life goes rather than sort of fit with a pattern, particularly kind of working really hard, paying off your mortgage and hopefully having a good life when you retire. We kind of felt quite risky. You don't know how long you're going to last. You don't know what your pension's going to be worth when you get to retirement age, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the vehicles that allows us to think more proactively about how we might support ourselves in later life is property. So we joined together, we continue to educate ourselves and continue to, build out the investment business. So that's what we do. It was a kind of a meeting of minds and a desire to want to, provide a vehicle for income that would outlast our willingness or our physical ability to work in a conventional sense. So yeah, we're sort of building up Clevernest at the same time as continuing to grow Codefinery, and we're sort of enjoying both of those things right now rather than sort of having to sacrifice today in order to make money for later. So that's really the ethos behind it.
No, that's nice to hear that you have a side hustle that goes along with your present day-to-day role as the CEO of Codefinery. Could you now please tell us a bit more about what you're doing right now with that role, and how do you manage both your current job and your side hustle?
Yeah, good question. So Codefinery has been around about 8 years. As I say, we're advisors to agencies of one size and shape or another. One of the things that characterizes that marketplace, regardless of the size or geography of your agency, is that there is so much sort of conditioning that agencies carry around with them, particularly that the market they're in is massively oversupplied. And one of the things I would argue strongly is that the market isn't oversupplied, it's just under-differentiated. And those are two very different things. So I like the analogy of looking at, you go into a BP garage or a 7-Eleven and you find that there are 50 different varieties of bottled water, and there will be one brand that you reach for, whether it's Liquid Death or Evian or whatever. And I think this is the power of branding, and this is the power of differentiation that agencies sometimes forget. So one of the great joys for me is to be able to go in and help those businesses understand that and really carve out some deep differentiation in their market, because it does allow them to protect their bottom line. It allows them to attract better people into the company. It's transformational. There's a huge joy in that. And that's, one of the reasons why it doesn't really feel like work to do it. So again, I work in the business alongside my wife. So I'm sort of more focused on the sort of being the public face of the company, and we set direction together, but it's sort of my instinct, because although she's smarter than me, she has an MBA I don't have, and she has all sorts of experience I don't have. I have more of an instinct for the agency market, having spent a lot of time in it. So I'll lead more on delivery across the workshops and the executive coaching and team coaching and so on, whereas she's brilliant in the background. She's brilliant at inspiration, she's brilliant at innovation, she's brilliant at operations. So yeah, we design products together, we refine how to deliver them together. She makes sure that the business is really efficient in the way that we operate. So yeah, that's kind of how Codefinery works, if you like. I think I've forgotten the second part of the question.
The second part was, how do you deal your day-to-day role with your side hustle?
Yeah, I think one of the things I don't believe in is this idea of work-life balance. And I've never really understood it, because it's like you can sort of take some from one side and put it on the other and rebalance the scales. And I've never really understood that, because if you have to work late and you miss your kids' dance recital or something like that, you can't redress that because it's done. And I think I'd rather have a job that doesn't feel like work, so that you build a life you don't feel like you need a holiday from. So yeah, between us as a couple, we have an awful lot on. We're always very, very busy, but we try very, very hard to slow down and listen and think, is this something I really want to do? And just try and reject as much as possible anything that doesn't feel like it's joyful or, progressive, or it gets us where we want to go. So yeah, it's a good way of reducing stress. It's a good way of sort of staying focused on the things that spark joy rather than the things that feel like, oh, yeah, I've got to do it. Yeah, that's kind of the balance of the two doesn't really come up, because, they're all in this kind of create a life that we love bucket. So there isn't really a clear distinction between the two of them, if that makes sense.
One thing I found interesting, what you were saying, is you mentioned, is this something what I want to do? And a part of me kept thinking, when did you realize that you wanted to coach agency businesses? Like, what sparked your interest? Was this during your time working for agencies? Was this something where when you wanted to then pursue this side hustle and your CEO job, was it like the leadership skills you demonstrated? What makes you very passionate about this?
Yeah, I think I sort of did probably from about 2011 onwards in my agency career. So probably if Codefinery launched in 2016, so probably the last 5 years of my agency career, I'd reached a level of seniority where I was being brought on as a commercial person, a new business director, or chief growth officer type roles. You reach that level of seniority where you're brought in, and the brief is often quite transformational. The agency is doing one thing, and they recognize that by positioning themselves differently in the market and successfully winning a different kind of client and a different kind of project, and potentially pricing it in a different way, these are all things which kind of catalyze the commercial transformation of the business. But having kind of come in and done that a few times, I suppose what I realized was that I could really achieve quite a lot in the first year. Invariably, I'd report to the chief exec. I'd have no one else really around me to stop me doing the things that that person and I wanted to do to help change the business. And then I found in year 2, it tended to slow down a bit because we'd done all the easy stuff. We'd maybe done some of the big stuff, but I, had a day job, I had a team to manage, and I was sort of distracted from maybe some of the more transformational things. And inevitably you start bumping up against the politics and bumping up against some of the things which are more difficult to change. I think that really started to sow the seed that actually I'd be able to affect more change more quickly from the outside looking in to an agency business. And I think I had one sort of false start where I started at an agency as a consultant, and they sort of, convinced me to stay as a full-time person. So signed a contract. And, after that decided actually, no, I really do want to go down this route of launching my own business and, really being kind of designing the engagements that we have rather than operating in this kind of middle ground between trying to drive change, but also being an employee. So I suppose there is a degree of leadership in there. There's a desire to want to sort of support a business in its change program, but also to be able to lead that process and to define how well it works. And, this is what I would call kind of classic consultancy as opposed to freelancing. I'm not there to pick up a role or to do a thing. My job is to help, uncover a future and help, support a business in reaching that future and playing a leadership role in that. Yeah, it feels like leadership is a kind of flavor of what we do. And then the kind of the coaching, I got qualified as a coach a few years ago because it's sort of stylistically, it's part of what I was doing within the consulting. And frankly, I thought it was just a bit messy. I was delivering workshops and having conversations with the clients. And sometimes they were quite teachy workshops. Some of them were quite presenty. Some of them were quite workshopy. Some of the conversations were quite mentory. Some of them were a bit coachy. You're just getting really clear in myself about doing that on a professional level, making sure that I could, be effective as well as credible, so that it ultimately created another revenue stream for the business as well. So I think it's a win-win. We do have plenty of standalone coaching clients, which was actually a bit of a surprise. The intention was that it would be that the coaching would follow on from the consulting work. If the consulting kind of defines the change in the business, generally the coaching is great at making that change stick in the business. It does happen as well. It's probably a much closer to a 50-50 split with the standalone coaching clients as well, which didn't anticipate, but it's all good. Yeah, I'm not sure I answered the question directly, but that's certainly how those skill sets came to play.
I think it definitely answered the question. I liked how you're very passionate and knowledgeable just giving that answer. And alone, I feel like I've already learned so much about why you do it. And I want to understand now in a more profound way what motivates you. And this might be what motivated you to, like a few years ago when you were just starting this up with Definery and Clevernest Property Group, but also what motivates you every day in terms of just getting out of bed in the morning to literally even just sitting right here and having this conversation. Like what motivates you part of your daily life?
Yeah, such a good question. I think probably, maybe on a 5-year basis, if you asked me this question 5 years ago, 5 years before that, probably keep giving you different answers. I think this is probably indicative of what does motivate me. There's a sense of progress. I love making progress on stuff. I remember my dad used to play golf at the weekend, and he used to come back, and when I was a little kid, I'd say, "Oh, did you win, Dad?" And he'd say, "Well, I hit the ball well." And I'd be like, "Who cares if you hit the ball well? Did you win? Did you not win?" And I didn't really understand it. And I think I understood that better much later in life for a couple of reasons. So one, I try and play tennis once a week. I have a coach, and he just improves my shots. Basically, it's as simple. I have no real interest in playing matches. I'll probably get there at some point, but I love that sense of gradual improvement, whether it's the way the racket swings or where my weight is or where my feet are and all the sort of technicalities of it. So I now know that the difference between hitting a ball really sweetly and hitting it not quite as sweetly as I'd like is what it's all about. I really understood what my dad was saying when he used to say that to me. So that sense of progress, I think, and getting better at things, I sort of refer to it as mastery. And just to be super clear about that, that's not about being the best at anything. I don't really care about that. But I do care about being the best I can be at something. I don't like doing things half-heartedly. So I think that's a big part of it, the sort of mastery thing. I think the other thing that's a big driver, which again, Inga and I really share, which I think I probably alluded to already, is this sense of intentionality. I just never want to be someone that life happens to. I'd rather be somebody that sort of makes life work for me, whatever comes my way. And there's always going to be good stuff and bad stuff that happens. Just trying to see the best in it and using it as, whether it's fuel or whether it's insight or learning or whatever, but just kind of being the leader of my own life, steering my own ship, even just having time in a busy week to carve out and go play tennis at 8:00 on a Friday morning. I like that I have the autonomy to be able to do that in the same way that I like that really very little goes into my diary without me explicitly wanting it to. And I don't forget that I'm very fortunate to be in a job that allows me to do that, because most people do have stuff just lands on their desk, which they might like, might not like, it might get in the way of stuff they want to do. So I'm very pleased and proud and determined to maintain that sense of intentionality. And as I say, I think it's something that Inga and I really share.
One thing I now want to ask you, which might tie a bit into this, but you talked about obviously what motivates you personally, but I want to understand now the fact that you coach people or coach businesses. Why do you feel like growth is such a crucial topic for you personally now? And I want to ask you this because you lead by example of trying to inspire people or businesses in terms of what you do. But why do you feel like personally this might tie in with the motivational aspect, but why is growth just as important as having the motivation to do something that you want to do personally?
That's an interesting question. I think, again, I probably would have given you a different answer some years ago. I think one of the things that's changed around that, which I see changing in the market, particularly since the pandemic, I think the way we thought about growth has evolved a bit. So we
Definitely.
work with sort of, listed holding company marketing agencies and advertising agencies, media agencies, and we work with independent ones that are, run by the founders. And I think particularly for the latter group, the definition of success has probably evolved a bit since the pandemic. And I think the way they think about growth has changed as well. So to just flesh that out, I think it felt like it was quite a masculine energy world for a lot of founders, not least because a lot of them were men, but also because a lot of the growth was quite attainment, achievement based. It was, I want to grow my business. I want to double in size. I want to hit, 5 million, I want to hit 10 million, 20 million, whatever it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's all quite left brain, all quite, a sort of a single flavor, if you like, of growth. And I think that was probably born out of a mindset of certainty that, the world was a relatively safe place, that the leaders of those businesses were quite safe in their upward trajectory. Yes, there would be bumps along the way, but generally if they worked hard, good things would happen. And I think one of the, perhaps silver linings of the pandemic was that perhaps people slowed down and recognized that that trajectory wasn't perhaps as safe as they thought it would be. And actually just simply getting bigger and making more money or, employing more people. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those things. Perhaps it wasn't the whole picture when it came to growth. So I think now I hear founders in particular talking about growth in a sense of a more attractive environment for people to work in. They talk about growth in terms of their own personal growth and achievement. They talk about their ability to, be more self-aware. I think that definition of growth has shifted. It's probably no surprise that I've also kind of come through the pandemic and had, my experience with it. It's coincided with my period of getting remarried. It coincided with my period of qualifying as a coach. So there's all that stuff going on there as well. But yeah, I think growth is important because it's a much richer topic than it ever used to be. Yeah, probably the simplest way I can say it. If every agency CEO I worked with just wanted to grow their headcount and their revenue and their profit without there being any great soul to it, I think I'd be far less kind of energized by helping them achieve that stuff. So I think there's a commonality there in terms of wanting to do something a bit bigger and broader and more mindful than just simply growing a business.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting in terms of how you mentioned that growth is more common or it's, I guess, more appreciated now than ever before. Maybe because of COVID-19, it's definitely allowed us to slow down and maybe reconsider our priorities at the end of the day. I think it's definitely allowed that to happen to many people in terms of the life they lived before and the life they live now is so different. And growth definitely has a spin on that in terms of that everyone is in their own path, everyone's in their own journey in terms of where they want to be years' time from where they are now. So I liked how you definitely answered the difference between why motivation and growth are things that everyone should keep in mind, that they're two different things, but lead to greater or rewarding paths in the end. For the last question, I actually had two originally I was going to ask, but I'm going to combine them into one. So think of yourself back when you were 18, about to go to university to study cell biology. How would you use what you've learned through the years and use that to give this advice, like one piece of advice you could give to your 18-year-old self? What would that be?
What would I tell my 18-year-old self? The first thing that pops into my head is that I've heard this from somewhere and it landed in my head. As humans, we're very good at forgetting what it was like not to know something. So once we assimilate a new piece of knowledge, it's like we never didn't know it. And I think that's one of the reasons like a question like this is hard. It's trying to sort of think back to what was going through my mind, 30 years ago and sort of what I was worried about. I don't really remember what I was like. I imagine I probably worried more. Maybe I sweated the small stuff, or maybe I beat myself up about things which, didn't need to be a big deal. I remember I was diligent back then. I always remember I liked doing a good job, and I've still got that. I think I would perhaps tell myself to trust my instincts and to do what I enjoy. Maybe that's a lesson it took me a little bit of time to really learn and to, kind of call it if it was doing something that wasn't for me, to be able to say, you know what, it's okay that this isn't for me, and it's okay to go and do something else, rather than perhaps feel like it needed to be a constant upward trajectory, because that's not how life works, right? There's ups and downs and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I think maybe trust my instincts and, keep doing what I love. And if you don't love it, don't do it.
Nice answer. Well, thank you very much, Robin, for joining us here today. If people would like to get in touch with you, what would be the best way?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn is the place to start. So just search Robin Bonn, that's Bonn, on LinkedIn, and you'll find me.
Awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in for this episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. A new guest will follow shortly later. Thanks again, Robin, for joining us here today, and speak to you guys soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.